Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 198th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. Today, I just wanted to riff a bit about a thought that I had about consciousness and this idea that you, as a person that is self-aware, a human, you have this third-person perspective that you can take on yourself, meaning I can be aware of being Martin. And so this self-awareness of being conscious, it's almost like a third-person view of yourself and talking about yourself in third person. There's always this mystery as to how that came about. How is it possible that you can actually see yourself from an outside perspective and talk about yourself and being aware of your actions as if you're talking about something that is separate from you? And so the answer I got is that when you're doing that, you're essentially tapping into the collective consciousness of humanity to view yourself in a third person kind of perspective. So let me put it this way. A unicellular organism doesn't have self-reflective capacities. That is, it cannot observe itself as being a cell. But inside a pluricellular organism, a cell can actually tap into that kind of third-person perspective, which is the pluricellular's perspective on that cell that is inside its body, to be able to have a kind of a second point of view or a higher kind of point of view on itself and what it's doing. Hence why the behavior of a cell inside a pluricellular organism isn't the same as the behavior of that same organism outside of that organism, of that pluricellular organism, of that kind of structure. And so that is, the more sophisticated the being that you're part of, the more powerful that kind of second person view or third person view of yourself. So this also explains to me why wolves inside a wolf pack don't behave like solitary wolves, or a school of fish does not behave, the fishes inside a school of fish do not behave like individual fishes. That is, to me, it's almost as if when conscious living beings associate in one way or another and create some kind of bonds or coherence, they create for themselves like a higher form of consciousness that they can tap into in order to display behaviors that could not appear in their state of separation. This also means that humanity's capability, or human capability, of looking at oneself in the third person evolves and becomes more and more powerful, or is easier to tap into, let's say, as humanity evolves as a collective, because the collective consciousness that you're tapping into becomes more and more mature, more and more wise, quote unquote, and can help you view yourself in that kind of third person view and solve problems for yourself that are when you're stuck in your ego self or your human issues in your state of separation, in order to bring you into coherence into that collective. And so there is kind of almost like a Russian doll kind of logic to this, of nested consciousnesses. And as soon as you surrender your state of separation and you start associating with self-similar consciousnesses, then you acquire that ability of viewing yourself from the third perspective. And obviously it's very difficult to be in an absolute state of separation. There's always some kind of bond that ties you to self-similar structures. That is, even unicellular organisms in their state of separation have the potential to view themselves in the third person, almost as if they're tapping into the future potential of them associating into a collective organism. And so they have that kind of latent ability. Now, I'm not saying it's the kind of the same kind of third person reflexive conscious perspective that humans have, obviously, because this gets more and more complex and sophisticated as we move along. But it starts to me with the living cell, the unicellular organism, and then that kind of reflexive capability grows because the structures grow in complexity themselves. So basically, cells inside the human body, for instance, they can tap into the third person perspective for their actions and display behaviors and a coherence that is impossible for them to achieve outside the body. That is coordinating to healing a wound or regenerating organs or doing plenty of other things, because they tap into the quote unquote wisdom of the collective, of their collective, but also they can be driven to actions which seemingly go against the interests of the collective. For instance, when the being they are a part of has issues to solve, like for instance, a human that is deeply entrenched in self-hatred and hates himself so much so that he manifests a cancerous tumor inside his body. And so, unicellular organisms do not have cancer. The very basic pluricellular organisms also don't have cancer. And cancer is very rare, actually, even in animals. It starts appearing with domestic animals because they are influenced by the human psyche and human emotions and, this human way of distorting kind of, how biology behaves and creating these problems which are just a mirror of the conflicting or unbalanced psyche of the human. And so, when they behave in a cancerous way, it's almost as if, again, they're tapping into your collective consciousness as a human being, that third person, and that third person perspective is telling them, I hate myself, whatever. And then it's almost like it creates a kind of split within the body. Like Michael Levin describes, basically like a disconnect from the bioelectric field of the body, and like a part of those cells that represents the part of you that you hate about yourself that now sees itself as being separate from the body and sort of eats you alive. And so it's my answer to the mystery of why there is, or how it is possible to have that kind of third person perspective about yourself, to view your actions as if from the outside, as if you were looking at them through the eye of a neutral observer. If there isn't that kind of higher consciousness or higher point of view, you cannot view yourself differently than the way that you view yourself. That is, the ego cannot look at itself outside of what it is and outside of its perceptions and actions and awareness, right? And so it all goes back also to the spiral dynamics theory of, like, you start out in the pure survival mode where there is no third person perspective about your actions and this reflexive capacity of reflecting on your own actions. It is just only purely, it's me, it's survival, and it is, I don't care about what happens on the outside, all I care about is what happens here. And the moment you acquire a consciousness, quote unquote, of your actions, is when you have a third person perspective which represents the being that is observing, or that represents the potential for forming a collective from all humans. And then obviously from that perspective, when you are attacking another human, it is from that consciousness's perspective as if it were attacking itself. And so there is when you can say, oh my God, I've just harmed myself by tapping into this higher consciousness, because from its perspective, that is what it is experiencing. Like if I hit myself or slap myself in the face right now with my hand, I'm experiencing this as me hurting myself, not as a hand that is separate from myself slapping another part that is separate from myself. But cells in a state of separation, if these cells were not aware that they're part of this collective, then my hand could pretend or feel, the cells of my hand could pretend or feel like they're slapping something that is outside of themselves, right? And so it's again this consciousness that is growing in complexity and that is capable of creating coherence among more and more self-similar consciousnesses or parts, and then displays a wisdom that grows also in complexity. Just like, one single ant is not going to display the same kind of behavior and intelligence as a whole anthill. And the same for bees, the same for many different animals. So it's as if the beehive itself is a being that has an awareness of its own and that acts via the coordinated action of all of its parts. It's just that it's not necessarily the barrier, or the physical barrier of that being isn't necessarily material like the barrier of the skin, but what I like to use as a term is like the psychic skin. The psychic skin. It's like an invisible envelope or a being or an entity that does have self-awareness, does have a kind of intelligence, and that intelligence is emergent from the coordinated action of all of those collectives. It's almost like an agglomerated wisdom from all of those different consciousnesses. So that's how you explain the existence of the possibility of looking at yourself as if you were looking outside yourself and being capable of talking about yourself and about your actions in the third person. I would say that if there were only one human on earth, it would be impossible for that human. That human would lose the ability to have that third person perspective on its own actions, because it would be in a first person experience of the world, because there is no other higher point of view on his actions whereby he can assemble with others and create a kind of coherence if he were all alone. So that's obviously, it's impossible to test that thought experiment, but that's what this idea that I had, that's where it leads to. So I hope you found this video interesting. Don't hesitate to leave a comment, like, share, subscribe, the usual, and talk to you in the next video. Bye guys.